three boys. Grew up in country South Australia on the Yorke Peninsula on a farm just outside of Maitland. So Central Yorks was sort of my stomping grounds for school and sport and all of those things. It's a family farm. I'm the sixth generation of my family to be on this particular property. So there's a lot of family history that we're sort of not in charge of, but there's a lot of history around the farm, and there's a lot of stuff that, particularly my parents now, that we've been running the farm for over a decade, or a couple of decades now, really. When my parents got married, they got a cottage, like a little transportable on bricks thing that got plopped down the road from the main farm manor, and that was where I grew up until I was 7, and then my grandparents moved into town, and we renovated and moved into the main house. We're on top of a hill too, so there's beautiful views sort of all around. And you know, when my parents were doing their own renovations, because every generation has added something to the house as they've gone. And sort of the most recent one my parents have added is a giant garden room for entertaining and for hosting, and just another space to be in. My mum uses it to paint, but she insisted on giant glass windows that you could see through her garden and down sort of the hill. So I'm the middle. So I've got an older brother and a younger brother. Lewis and Caleb. Lewis is older, and yeah, like growing up, it's sort of, you know, me and Lewis in particular were constantly at each other's throats, and Caleb would I'd fight with Caleb, but not as fiercely as I would fight with Lewis. It was quite a standard brother relationship, and then went to school in the local town. I was never as obsessed with sport and as obsessed with sort of the things that boys were often obsessed. And it was from very young. My parents didn't know what I was in terms of my identity, but they knew that I was, like, they always, thankfully, I'm super lucky that they always thought of me as just, it's Jared. So when I was 3 or 4, the big Christmas gift I got that year was a Cinderella Polly Pocket castle that's about that big, with all the little figurines and a dance floor that moves. And my mum loves telling the story of when I opened it, I just sat back and clutched my little hands and I was like, am I allowed to open it? So they've always, and like I got dolls sometimes because it would be what I wanted. And I'm so lucky that, you know, in country Australia in the late 90s, I had parents who went, yeah, that's what he wants, that's what we're going to give him. And, you know, we'd have extended family or people in the town who would go, oh, you know that Jared's going to probably end up. And my mum would go, that's for him to tell me, not for you. Right. And she's my biggest champion quite often, but she's always shut down any sort of naysaying from other adults, particularly as I was growing up. So I never had that feeling of not fitting in the whole country dynamic. I just knew that I wasn't as crazy about football as all of the boys were. And you know, I ended up doing hockey for a few years because I didn't want to do football, because I was like, it just seems violent to me. And then as I was going through primary school, the friends that I made and stuff, we'd play football during recess and lunch, and always happy to play that with friends. And they'd go, oh, you actually got enough skills that you would not just sit on the bench every game. So eventually quit hockey and joined AFL and did that for, I think, about 3 or 4 years before the coach was a little toxic, not to put him on blast, but I would get cut from the squad in finals because I wasn't one of the good players, and there were a lot of us who sat on the bench. And then after the league made that something you weren't allowed to do, because it happened to a lot of kids around the Yorke Peninsula, then I would just sit on the bench for 3-4 games in a row, with the coach constantly sort of like, oh, you know, there was never a good opportunity to put you out for a run. I was like, we were down by 10 goals. I could have just gone out for a jog instead of sitting in the rain in the box. So gave up on that by the time I sort of hit late primary school, early middle school. It was me and 4 girls all moved to the boarding school at the same time. It was a co-ed boarding school, and because I knew the girls, I befriended all of the boarder girls. And then as they made friends with the day scholar girls, I made friends with all of them. And I do remember.
So you had quite a group.
I had quite a contingent of female friends, and I do remember several times getting some looks from the popular footy boys at the city school, because I was talking to all of their girlfriends, and I would just grab my lunch and go and sit with them, and then, you know, I eventually made my own friends and found my own space there. And it was very much sort of, I was one of the awkward kids. Like I didn't, I was a music student. I watched my older brother's Year 12 drama performance and said, that's what I want to do.
Oh, really?
In Year 12. I was like, that's what I want to do, Year 12 drama. So I was still absolutely 100% set that I was going to be some sort of scientist. When I was really little, I always used to say, I want to teach the teachers. So I thought that I was going into, science or maths or something like that. And then my older brother performing The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, which was one of my favorite books growing up. I went, okay, that's something that I have to do for Year 12 and that'll be my fun subject. And it ended up being the one that caused the most stress for me because I was so worried about being perfect in it. Nothing gets me better than watching a live performance. It's, there's TV shows and movies and things that I've watched that have really grabbed me and stayed with me. But there's just something about live theatre and the energy in the room. And, even like when I'm going to watch, students perform, nowadays, I'm still like, it's still there. And if the student's brilliant, then it's an amazing thing to see. But even if it's, not the best show in the world because they're all brand new at it, it's still an exciting place to watch because you're watching people experience that sometimes for the first time. There's just a magic to it. And there's a connection between a performer on stage and someone sitting in front of them that you just don't get with film and TV. You get a lot more close-ups and you get a lot more sort of extreme looks at emotion on TV, but it all has to be subtler, whereas everything in theatre is bigger. And it feels, to me, as someone who was quite a loud, over-the-top camp child, it's that thing, Year 12, it feels like the end of the world because it's, it's the current end of your life. It's where you've gotten to so far. And so there was this thing of, I've got to choose what I'm doing in uni, and if I don't choose right, and I went up for everything. I did the UMAT medical exam to try and be a doctor. I did several different science courses. I looked into business and accounting, but that stuff didn't interest me at all. So I thought, right, well, science is where it's at. And I discovered that one of the universities, UniSA, did a Bachelor of Science where you had a major, a minor, and then a second minor that was free choice. So it didn't have to be in the sciences. So I sort of took the subjects that I was doing, physics, chemistry, maths, and drama in Year 12, and went, well, I'll just do that at uni until I figure out exactly where I'm going. So I did Bachelor of...
So hold on, so by the time you'd left high school, you hadn't even then decided that drama was really...
No, hadn't at all decided that, performing and drama and entertainment was where I wanted to be. I was very much sort of just going through the motions of what I thought I should do and what was sort of expected of like, oh yes, go to uni, even though my parents have never put any pressure on me to do anything. There was never any pressure about taking over the farm. It's been a running joke for years when I was little. People would ask, because it's a big thing for farming families of who's going to take over. And people would ask and they go, oh, so which one of the three boys is going to take over? And they'd say, not Jared, because I was allergic to everything we grew. So it doesn't work if you're working the combine harvester and come in as a swollen, red, snotty mess. It was sort of, my parents always said, the farm's here if you want to come back to it, but you absolutely go and find yourselves and do your life how you want to do it. So I sort of was like, okay, well, I've always seen myself working in a lab or working somewhere like that. And I went to uni as a physics major with a minor in drama and a minor in chemistry. And halfway through the year, I hit a wall. I was already going through a bit of a crisis because I was such a social person, and that's why I think I was such a butterfly in school. I liked talking to different people, and for science, I sat down in my physics lecture and everyone sat at least one chair away from each other because we were all awkward, nerdy people, and we weren't great at social interaction, and I wasn't great at it. It was like, looking back at myself, I cringe at how I was in uni sometimes. I walked into my first day of acting class, and this Scottish girl just said, "Ginger kid, you're with us." And they were my friends for the first semester, and I was like, oh, perfect. Like, I've got these people I can talk to and hang out with, whereas it took 2-3 weeks for the science side of my degree to all start talking and sharing and making friends and finding our friendship groups there. And then every year after that, so halfway through the year, I called my parents sort of freaking out, going, I'm going to change to media arts. that's not exactly what we were probably hoping for. And they were like, no, if you're not happy, do it. So yeah, like super lucky that their child went, I want to be an artist. And they went, okay, instead of going, what about work? What about, you know, finding like steady work? And what about your prospects and all of that? There was never any of that. And it's sort of it was as I was going through this, because in high school, I had my first crush on a boy. First one that I was able to identify as a crush, because I'd had crushes on girls, and this was my first crush that I went, oh no, I think I like this boy. And I was not in any way prepared. I grew up in the country. There was no sort of discussion of queer people existing beyond the standard schoolyard insults. So that freaked me out. So I shut down any sort of romantic part of my life intentionally until I got to uni. And there I started meeting other queer people and meeting the friends that I have now and my chosen family, and sort of worked out that, oh, it's okay to be that, and it's okay if I get there eventually. Took a while, but so yeah, that was the first difficult conversation in my uni years with my parents of, I'm going to do media arts. And once I stepped fully into the media arts world, I went, oh, this is where I'm meant to be. All of my uni assignments and all of the work that I was doing at uni to learn both sides, both the front-facing performance side and the production side, fascinated me, and I was like enthralled by it and having an absolute blast making friends and making stupid little films that now I look back at and go, oh, that was horrible. How did I get credit for that mark? But it was because I was new at it. I mean, that's one of the big challenges, is being able to look at myself perform in a critical way instead of just going, oh, I'm performing, get it out of my side.
So look at it almost, that's what I do, look at it almost in that third person.
Yeah, looking at it and going, oh, I've slipped out of character there for a second and that's broken the magic of the scene and stuff like that, which I'm still learning to do. And it's a hard thing to sort of sit there and judge yourself in a way that is kind and not the sort of toxic way that, particularly as a queer person, some things get heaped onto you. So
it's self-criticism.
Yeah, self-criticism and stuff like that. So as I was going through uni, I also began to I sort of had a few explosive sudden encounters with other men, and sent me into a tailspin, and I was freaking out. And it was, I had a girlfriend briefly in uni, and I broke up because we ended up breaking up just because I was too stressed out, too busy, and I didn't set aside time for her that she needed and wanted. And I was always like, sorry, I've got rehearsals, I'm doing 2 shows at once, I don't have time, and running around and things like that. So it was very much this thing of, and I remember I took her to a party with a whole bunch of people from home and from boarding school, because they sort of all began to bleed together into one big group. And I introduced them. I was like, this is my girlfriend. And they all went, oh, we thought you were gay. I was like, this is my girlfriend. She had her own stuff and she had anxiety about the relationship. And she's like, it feels like you don't want to spend time with me. And I was like, everyone seems to think that I'm gay, and the only one who doesn't is you and me, and I'm scared that they're right. And that was my first year of uni. So the freakouts were happening in the background. I was like, nope, just focus on the creative side. And then my second year, I sort of finally got around to figuring out that bisexuality exists. And pansexuality, and it's not just a one or the other. It's a spectrum, and finding where I landed on it, and it was a huge relieving moment of it. And I remember I called one of my dear friends from uni who was bisexual, and was one of the reasons that I sort of figured this out. And I called them and I said, oh, I'm bi, and they were hilarious because they said, okay, I don't know what you want from me in this moment. I was like, I just needed the first time to go well. In terms of gender and things, gender's a bullcrap construct in my mind. I don't mind if people use he, she, they pronouns with me. I'm like, he's been working. So that's why I don't identify as non-binary. If anything, I'm apathetic to it all. I'm like, I don't care. Cool. You can call me queen, king, whatever you want. It's whatever you're comfortable with, and I will probably respond to it. My favorite joke is going, as long as you're talking about me, that's the main thing. So after uni, I worked in the amateur theatre scene in Adelaide for a while, and I managed to get sort of steady paying work with a Perth-based company that did interactive horror shows. And they were the most fun ever, to go into a park at like 7 o'clock at night, dress up like a murderer and come running out screaming, and at the same time they're having to solve the mystery of who the murderer is and all that. It was such a fun and interesting concept, and they liked me enough to keep asking me on, and I ended up being the tour manager for them for about 8 months in 2017. So I toured all Queensland, regional New South Wales and Victoria. I did Tasmania. So just city to city, rural city to city as well, performing this like horror show. And so I sort of became one of their key people that they could call on, and they let me know that in their plan, they were planning a 2018 UK tour, their first one. And I was so excited for them, and I said, I would love to be on it. And they said, well, if you can get yourself to the UK, we'll hire you as a London-based actor. I set about getting a visa, and before I did that, I was talking to my acting coach at the time, and I said, I'll probably go there. And then they were talking about doing some bigger theatre shows in Melbourne, so I might move to Melbourne afterwards. Why would you come back? You're going over to one of the biggest theatre centres of the world. Why on earth would you come back? And I took that to heart, and I went, that's an excellent point. So applied for a visa and managed to get the 2-year mobility visa so I could go and do what I wanted, but had to leave after 48 months. And sort of went and didn't look back. And it was terrifying, but I think I had a better handle on it than I would have if I hadn't gone to boarding school. So there's been a lot of hard resets of meeting new people and finding things where I only have 1 or 2 support people from my previous life where I've moved to. So London was its own unique challenges, but it was also this oddly freeing moment, because by this point I was out to my immediate family and I was out to my friends, but I wasn't sort of out to the world and to a lot of extended family. And my older brother accidentally outed me to my mum's side of the family at a wedding I went to the day before I flew out for London. And it all went really lovely. It was just sort of over the evening, family members would come and be like, apparently you're telling people something. I was like, not intentionally, but yes, I am now. So here it is. But when I got to London, I was like, I can really sort of not reinvent myself, but I can just explore who I am as a person. There's no way that people back home are going to find out and like talk. And because that was always one of my things is, what would people say? And something that, as an actor, you have to sort of learn to go, no, I don't care what they say. Yeah. I'm going to do this because it's an artistic choice and creative. And if the audience reacts, great. If they don't, then, and it's looking like it's not working, then you have to rework it. But not everyone's going to love everything about you. And so learning that was an interesting lesson as part of the London journey of like discovering who I am. And I like, it's one of those things where when people come out as queer, they often do a wild swing to the opposite. So they go crazy with their look and they change who they are. And people feel like it's not, like some people from your old life might feel like, that's not the real you. And I go, no, it is. It's just, you've never been able to express that side before. So I had a wild swing the other way when I went to London from sort of this sort of, camp, feminine country boy who was like, wanted to be an actor and stuff. I went fully into, all right, well, let's lean into the queer stuff and let's explore that. And I went to my first Pride ever, which was such a freeing experience walking around. And then like realizing, sometimes I'm forcing it a bit and I'm affecting my voice sometimes, so people will think.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like just adding a bit more sort of like camp and a bit more fun to sort of be like, no, please like me because I'm fun and stuff.
So what made you aware of that then?
Just sort of like just a self-awareness of, and like when I came back to visit one Christmas, visit my family, and my dad said, I'm really glad that you're still you. I went, like what a weird thing to say. And he was like, well, no, there was a concern that you would come back and like, I wouldn't recognize you because you were so different. Which I think was a concern for my parents because, it means, well, how much has he felt like he's been forced to hide around us, which is awful for them. It was awful for them because they were nothing but supportive. But it was just that I wasn't doing it a lot. It was just every now and then when I go, I really want this person to like me, and it seems like they're really clicking with me because we're both queer, I'll just ham that up a bit. So I was studying a diploma in musical theatre. I was working full time in a show. I was living my best life over there, and then the pandemic happened. And I couldn't do an agent showcase for my course, and so I didn't even get to get my name out there after my course, and the show shut down, and I was...
So this kind of interrupted the trajectory.
Yeah, it did. I only had until, so that was the start of 2018. I only had until May that year, but I was like, that's still enough time for me to get my name out, be seen by a few people, maybe get an agent who could get me a European gig for a few months, so then I can travel over there and then apply for a fresh visa to do a master's in musical theatre or something. I hadn't really set down what my plan was, but the plan was not to leave. It was wait the full 48 months, leave in May. And then COVID happened, and it happened sort of in the middle of preparing for a end of semester showcase, and they had to make the call of, we can't do the showcase anymore. So I left with no sort of proof of what I'd done. So it was a very tumultuous time of feeling like nothing had come from London, which wasn't true. There was so much like life experience, so many wonderful friendships that I still have, and beautiful experiences. I worked the Edinburgh Fringe for an American improv company. I toured the UK with this horror company. So it was this very sort of, I very much was hard on myself going, well, you've accomplished nothing. When it wasn't my fault that I had to come home. It was completely out of my control. Country Chic was my show about my experiences traveling from country Australia to Adelaide to an even bigger city of London to back again. And it was my 2 weeks in isolation when I got back that I really sort of went, okay, we're going to write a show about this. I'd already had a few ideas of, oh, that song would work well for telling this story, or that song might make a nice anecdote. But I sort of, in the 2 weeks, I went, right, we're going to figure out exactly what songs we want, because I wasn't a songwriter, so it's like, I'll use other people's work and pay for the rights and all of that. And I'll write my life around these songs. And I just kept finding these songs that were perfect. And then it was sort of sitting down and writing, right, what did I learn in London? I learned, I can push myself too far the other way. Like, growing up in the country, there was definitely a sort of closeting of myself without knowing it, because I didn't realize until I was 18, 19 that I was queer. But it was this big thing of realizing, oh yes, I can step into the closet. And I did when I came back, because I was worried because I moved back to the farm, because I didn't have sort of a spot. There was no point moving back to Adelaide. There was no work there yet for me. So moved back in with my parents and sort of had this big existential crisis of, well, what's been the point of it all? And came to this show of, came to this sort of realization as I was writing that it's not, it wasn't a, oh, look, I survived growing up in the country and I went to the big city and now everything's great. And it wasn't hating on the country at all, because I've never hated the country, the fact that I grew up there, and I've never hated the people that I choose to keep in my life from there. I've got a huge support network back in the country. The opening night of this Fringe show was my mum's entire workplace. It was the entire health centre back home made a trip up on a bus and came to see my show. And it was this beautiful thing of, no, I've got dozens of mothers back in Maitland who are championing me and who love me for who I am.
And you've done the show actually in the country, haven't you?
Yes, so wrote this show that was my love letter to big city life and like Wheatfield, because I felt like, because for the longest time it was like, well, I'm too country for the city and I'm too city for the country. It was, I was too much of a like prissy, like, oh, I don't like dirty things for country living. But then all of my city friends would go, God, you are such a bogan, so often when I talk and tell stories and things. And so it was this odd fight in myself of, well, which one am I? And it was that, well, I'm in between. And it was that a beautiful realization, like, hey, I'm bisexual. I'm not just straight or just gay. I'm somewhere in the middle. It was the same sort of realization of like, I'm both. I can explore those sides of myself. And so it was a celebration of that. And I wrote it as a sort of message, like that I was like, I don't know if anyone will get it, but a message to other people like me of like, you don't have to choose. You don't have to worry about what people will think. You can celebrate yourself, and that will bring joy, and that will bring the people that matter.
Do you think that's an ongoing experience, an ongoing don't know what the word experience, but
It's
project.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like that, the development of oneself continues, doesn't it?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
Is it a project that you continually rewrite and write to have different music for and talk?
Yeah.
Are you going to continue to tell that story? Though?
It's well, I'd love to. I performed it at the Adelaide Fringe in 2021, and then I performed it in my hometown, which was amazing because I'd rewritten it for my hometown and sort of rewrote some of the stories because I was like, well, I don't need to explain country like stories because they've all lived the same exact stories. But the country show,
They haven't lived it through you though.
No, they haven't. But it was sort of taking out a lot of the explanations of like, you know, how in country football everyone parks up around the oval in a big circle to watch the game and everyone's leaning on their horns every time there's a goal scored. That's a very rural Australian thing to do compared to sort of, you know, you park at a football stadium, you go and cheer for the Crows or the Paw or whoever. So rewrote it for the country, and the biggest difference, and it was a spur of the moment end of the show, I sort of got a glance at the time and was like, oh, I've got 10 minutes to fill, and I realised there were a few stories that I'd glossed over because live performance, particularly cabaret, if I forget it, it's not in the show that night. So I'd realised there were a few stories that I was like, oh, I'd really love to talk about that. And I was like, well, how can I do that without it seeming like I'm just shoehorning it in near the end? And on the stage was a pair of 6-inch red stilettos that I'd bought for the promotion of the show. Because I'd worn heels at London Pride, but they were only like 4-inch stiletto boots, my first ever heels. So these ones, I was like, these are great promo shot things. And thankfully, I've never had a problem walking in heels. First time I tried them on, I was like, oh, I've been walking on point for years, just doing dance practice and things. I know what I'm doing. So while I was there, my kindergarten teacher was one of the people in the front row. I said, I know you've been looking at them, Joe. Should I put them on? And she was like, absolutely. So I walked around in a silver sequin jacket and 6-inch stilettos in my hometown, which was something I never thought I would ever be comfortable doing.
Oh wow, yeah.
It was a spur of the moment, and I was honestly scared as I was getting up to do it. I was like, they've all been laughing for the past hour, so I know they haven't hated it. And there was a lot of lessons that I'd learnt from the 1 year that I'd spent living in Sydney that I was like, oh well, that needs to go in now because so Country Chic is very much a love letter to myself, but to other queer people of your journey's never over, and it's the sooner you can get to recognizing how, like, it's a quote, to quote myself from the show, like, life isn't a 2D puzzle, it's a 3D artistic sculpture. So if you're not getting someone, or if you're not understanding yourself, you're just looking at yourself from the wrong angle, and you need to readjust your thinking. And it's not a simple like, oh, I'm just gonna do it overnight. It takes years, it takes time, and it's something that I'm constantly doing, and it's I'm now experimenting more with being comfortable with my queerness and with my more, like, with my feminine and my masculine side. Like wearing a denim jacket, I used to hate denim and leather and like jeans and things like that, and now I'm sort of like, no, I lean into it a bit more because I like it and it's comfortable, and at the same time, you know, wearing jewelry and painting my nails and things like that, and wearing makeup. It's sort of now I'm at a point where I can go, well, what do I feel like doing today? And it's not ever going to be a worry of, well, what's going to happen to me if I do it? Because that is a fear. That's a fear for so many queer people of, well, if I express myself fully, if someone doesn't like it, there's a chance I'll be attacked. Loving yourself takes time. It takes effort. And it's a scary process, but once you get to a point where you are able to surround yourself with people who love you and with things that you love, it makes it all worthwhile and it makes it all make sense. And if you're not there yet, it's okay. One of my favourite things that I learnt during my time in London was a dance teacher sort of watched us all as we were stretching and watched us in our first lesson, and she said, right, I want everyone to sit down, and the second that you start judging yourself, I need you to turn and look the other way, because everyone is on a different journey and we are all running the same race, but we are not all starting from the same spot. So it's that thing of like figuring out where you are, and if it's not where you want to be yet, that's okay. Now you know where you can move to, move towards.
And, you know, from this conversation, I've had this sense that what you're really also saying is that it's really helpful just to be kind to yourself.
Yeah, kind of like, I've always believed in kindness to others, and kind of like my mum.
But you had a family.
Yeah,
you had a family that were kind to you.
That's the thing. That's why I.
Not everybody has that.
No, yeah, that's exactly it. That's the thing of like I preface this with. Like, even though I had the most supportive family, it took work for me to break out of, internalized homophobia and things. But the fact that I had that support made my journey that much easier compared to some other people. And if you don't have that, it can take more time, and it's not something to beat yourself up about, because it's not something you can control. You can only control how you feel, and it's a process to learn how to do that. And it's not even controlling, it's being in command of yourself. And being able to go, well, no, I'm not going to engage with that family member if they're treating me in a toxic way, or I'm not going to do that. And I have people outside of my immediate circle who, I've had awful interactions with. I had a guy at a party once go, oh, it's nice to meet one of you people that's not so uptight about everything. It's that realization of, like, even when I'm dealing with myself sometimes, I go, well, I'm going to not engage in this anymore because I'm not treating myself kindly. So it's that learning to disengage when it's only doing you harm that I think is one of the big things that I've learned over the years.